Hey guys, Liz here, aka Isabelle Cheren. Okay, so today starts my narration of a book, and the book I've chosen is actually The Virgin and the Gypsy by David Herbert Lawrence, so D.H. Lawrence for short. And I'm not going to actually tell you anything about the book because I'm just going to start reading it to you. But I thought I'd sort of pick on something. I was actually going to do Edgar Allan Poe, and then I thought, no, I need to brush up on my spooky talking. And plus, it's the first time I'm narrating a book or speaking it, so I thought I'd just give it a go like that and see how I go. But okay, so I'm going to start. So today I'm just going to do chapter 1, and I think that'll be enough listening time for you, and then we will see how it goes. And then you can tell me whether you want me to stop. Anyhow, on with the book. When the vicar's wife went off with a young and penniless man, the scandal knew no bounds. Her 2 little girls were only 7 and 9 years old respectively, and the vicar was such a good husband. True, his hair was grey, but his moustache was dark. He was handsome, and still full of furtive passion for his unrestrained and beautiful wife. Why did she go? Why did she burst away with such an eclat of revulsion, like a touch of madness? Nobody gave any answer. Only the pious said she was a bad woman, while some of the good women kept silent. They knew. The 2 little girls never knew. Wounded, they decided that it was because their mother found them negligible. The ill wind that blows nobody any good swept away the vicarage family on its blast. Then lo and behold, the vicar, who was somewhat distinguished as an essayist and a conversationalist, and whose case had aroused sympathy among the bookish men, received the living of Paperwick. The Lord had tempered the wind of misfortune with a rectorate in the north country. The rectory was a rather large, ugly stone house down by the river Papal, before you came into the village. Further on, beyond where the road crosses the stream, were the big old stone cotton mills once driven by water. The road curved uphill into the blank, bleak stone streets of the village. The vicarage family received decided modification upon its transference into the rectory. The vicar, now the rector, fetched up his old mother and his sister, and a brother from the city. The 2 little girls had a very different milieu from the old home. The rector was now 47 years old. He had displayed an intense and not very dignified grief after the flight of his wife. Sympathetic ladies had stayed him from suicide. His hair was almost white, and he had a wide-eyed, wild, tragic look. You had only to look at him to know how dreadful it all was, and how he had been wronged. Yet somehow there was a false note. Some of the ladies who had sympathized most profoundly with the vicar secretly rather disliked the rector. There was a certain furtive self-righteousness about him when all was said and done. The little girls, of course, in the vague way of children, accepted the family verdict. Granny, who was over 70 and whose sight was failing, became the central figure in the house. Aunt Sissy, who was over 40, pale, pious, and gnawed by an inward worm, kept house. Uncle Fred, a stingy and grey-faced man of 40, who just lived dingily for himself, went into town every day, and the rector, of course, was the most important person after Granny. They called her the mater. She was one of those physically vulgar, clever old bodies who had got her own way all her life by buttering the weakness of her menfolk. Very quickly she took her cue. The rector still loved his delinquent wife, and would love her till he died. Therefore, shh. The rector's feelings were sacred. In his heart was enshrined the pure girl he had wedded and worshipped. Out in the evil world, at the same time, there wandered a disreputable woman who had betrayed the rector and abandoned his little children. She was now yoked to a young and despicable man, who no doubt would bring her the degradation she deserved. Let this be clearly understood, and then shh. For in the pure loftiness of the rector's heart still bloomed the pure white snowflower of his young bride. This white snowflower did not wither. That other creature who had gone off with that despicable young man was none of his affair. The mater, who had been somewhat diminished and insignificant as a widow in a small house, now climbed into the chief armchair in the rectory and planted her old bulk firmly again. She was not going to be dethroned. Astutely she gave a sigh of homage to the rector's fidelity to the pure white snowflower, while she pretended to disapprove. In sly reverence for her son's great love, she spoke no word against that nettle which flourished in the evil world, and which had once been called Mrs. Arthur Saywell. Now, thank heaven, having married again, she was no more Mrs. Arthur Saywell. No woman bore the rector's name. The pure white snowflower bloomed in perpetuum, without nomenclature. The family even thought of her as she who was once Cynthia. All was water on the mater's mill. It secured her against Arthur's ever marrying again. She had him by his feeblest weakness, his skulking self-love. He had married an imperishable white snowflower, lucky man. He had been injured, unhappy man. He had suffered, what a heart of love. And he had forgiven. Yes, the white snowflower was forgiven. He even made provision in his will for her when that other scoundrel, but shh, don't even think too near to that horrible nettle in the rank outer world, she who was once Cynthia. Let the white snowflower bloom inaccessible on the heights of the past. The present is another story. The children were brought up in this atmosphere of cunning self-sanctification, of unmentionability. They, too, saw the snowflower on inaccessible heights. They, too, knew that it was throned in lone splendour aloft their lives, never to be touched. At the same time, out of the squalid world sometimes would come a rank, evil smell of selfishness and degraded lust, the smell of that awful nettle, she who was once Cynthia. This nettle actually contrived at intervals to get a little note through to her girls, her children, and at this the silver-haired mater shook inwardly with hate, for if she who was once Cynthia ever came back, there wouldn't be much left of the mater. A secret gust of hate went from the old granny to the girls, children of that foul nettle of lust, that Cynthia who had such an affectionate contempt for the mater. Mingled with all of this was the children's perfectly distinct recollection of their real home, the vicarage in the south, and their glamorous but not very dependable mother, Cynthia. She had made a great glow, a flow of life, like a swift and dangerously sun in the home, forever coming and going. They always associated her presence with brightness, but also with danger, with glamour, but with fearful selfishness. Now the glamour was gone, and the white snowflake flower, like a porcelain wreath, froze in its grave. The danger of instability, the peculiarly dangerous sort of selfishness, like lions and tigers, was also gone. There was now a complete stability in which one could perish safely. But they were growing up, and as they grew they became definitely confused, more actively puzzled. The mater, as she grew older, grew blinder. Somebody had to lead her about. She did not get up toward midday. Yet blind or bedridden, she held the house. Besides, she wasn't bedridden. Whenever the men were present, the mater was in her throne. She was too cunning to court neglect, especially as she had rivals. Her great rival was the younger girl, Yvette. Yvette had some of the vague, careless blitheness of She Who Was Cynthia, but this one was more docile. Granny perhaps had caught her in time. Perhaps. The rector adored Yvette and spoiled her with a doting fondness, as much to say, am I not a soft-hearted, indulgent old boy? He liked to have weaknesses to a hair's breadth. She knew them, this opinion of himself, and the mater knew his, and she traded on them by turning them into decorations for him, for his character. He wanted, in his own eyes, to have a fascinating character, as women want to have fascinating dresses. And the mater cunningly put beauty spots over his defects and deficiencies. Her mother love gave her the clue to his weaknesses, and she hid them from him with decorations. Whereas She Who Was Cynthia, but don't mention her in this connection, in her eyes the rector was almost humpbacked and an idiot. The funny thing was, Granny secretly hated Lucille, the older girl, more than the pampered Yvette. Lucille, the uneasy and irritable, was more conscious of being under Granny's power than was the spoilt and vague Yvette. On the other hand, Aunt Sissy hated Yvette. She hated her very name. Aunt Sissy's life had been sacrificed to the mater, and Aunt Sissy knew it, and the mater knew she knew it. Yet as the years went on, it became a convention. The convention of Aunt Sissy's sacrifice was accepted by everybody, including the self-same Sissy. She prayed a good deal about it, which also showed that she had her own private feelings somewhere. Poor thing. She had ceased to be Sissy. She had lost her life and her sex, and now she was creeping towards 50. Strange green flares of rage would come up in her, and at such times she was insane. But Granny held her in her power, and Aunt Sissy's one object in life was to look after the mater. Aunt Sissy's green flares of hellish hate would go up against all young things sometimes. Poor thing, she prayed and tried to obtain forgiveness from heaven. But what had been done to her she could not forgive, and the vitriol would spurt in her veins sometimes. It was not as if the mater were a warm, kindly soul. She wasn't. She only seemed it, cunningly, and the fact dawned gradually on the girls. Under her old-fashioned lace cap, under her silver hair, under the black silk of her stout, forward, bulging body, this old woman had a cunning heart, seeking forever her own female power, and through the weakness of the unfresh, stagnant men she had bred, she had kept her power as her years rolled on, 70 to 80, and from 80 on the new lap towards 90. For in the family there was a whole tradition of loyalty to one another, and especially to the mater. The mater, of course, was the pivot of the family. The family was her own extended ego. Naturally, she covered it with her power, and her sons and daughters, being weak and disintegrated, naturally were loyal. Outside the family, what was there for them but danger and insult and ignominy? Had not the rector experienced it in his marriage? So now caution and loyalty, fronting the world. Let there be as much hate and friction inside the family as you like. To the outer world, a stubborn fence of unison.